Well, good morning once again. Good to see everybody here. Thankful to be with you. Thankful for the worship service we just had. Thankful for the thoughts and the prayer, Luke's prayer, and Danny leading us in these songs, and Rob's thoughts for the Lord's Supper. It's been an edifying time for me, and I know it has been for you as well. We're going to continue in our series on the home, and we're going to zero in on the role of the wife in 1 Peter 3. If you have your Bibles, turn over to 1 Peter chapter 3. We're looking at really Ephesians this weekend and what Ephesians has to say about the home and this transformation, this restoration that God has initiated through the gospel. And the gospel touches every area of our life, including the home. And Ephesians chapter 5, of course, is the part of Ephesians that is most clearly directed toward husbands and wives. And we're going to look at Ephesians 5 tonight as we look at the husband's role. Ephesians 5 is tilted toward the husband. There's about 3/4 of the verses, I think it's 9 out of 12 verses are devoted to the husband. So we're going to use that tonight as we talk about the husband's role. We see the flip of that in 1 Peter 3. There are 7 verses here devoted to marriage, but only one of them addresses the husband. We're going to talk about that verse in a moment. But I've chosen 1 Peter because it has so many things to say to the wives, so much more than what we see in Ephesians 5. And I'll explain more why I've chosen this as we go. We've already looked at 1 Peter 3 this morning as we talked about social media, and girls especially, but guys have been affected by this as well. And we talked about how social media is sending these lies, telling our daughters that they're not pretty, they're not worthy, they're not loved, they're not lovable. All of these things, I believe, are of the devil. Tech companies are taking advantage of this situation, but obviously we can see a lot of demonic influence in what's going on today. But all of these things are attacking the identity of our young people. And Peter has a lot to say about our identity in Christ. We look at 1 Peter 1 and verse 1. We are elect exiles. We are not of this world. We are to conduct ourselves with fear throughout the time of our exile, verse 17. He calls us sojourners and exiles in chapter 2 and verse 11. He talks about the rest of the time of the flesh in chapter 4 and verse 2. An exile is someone who is in a place that they don't belong. They are out of place. They're a foreigner. Not just a visitor. Not just someone who's on vacation. I go to a lot of places in the world where I realize I don't fit in. I'm an American. I stand out like a sore thumb. But I don't feel like I am objectionable to the people around me. I mean, sometimes, some places you kind of feel that way. But it's not the same feeling you get when you're in exile. Not only does the exile not feel comfortable around the locals where he is residing, the locals don't feel comfortable around him. And this creates animosity and conflict. The exile is not appreciated. The exile is not welcome, not wanted, even hated. There's animosity. We wish you weren't here. You're a bother to us. We wish you would just leave us alone and get away from us. Things are said, lies are told about exiles that are not true, rumors and false accusations. And that's why Peter talks so much about persecution in this context of us being exiles in this world. The persecution comes precisely because we don't fit in, and the world doesn't know what to think of us or to do with us. The way we survive and thrive as exiles is in our identity. We know who we are. We are not just exiles, we are elect exiles. God has chosen us. What does it feel like to be chosen? We talked about a young man getting down on one knee and offering or asking for a young lady's hand in marriage. That makes the young lady feel special, loved. I remember when I was in school, I was not very athletic. I'm still not very athletic, coordinated. When they were choosing teams on the playground, I always got nervous when they started choosing teams because I knew I wasn't going to be one of the first ones chosen. When I was playing Little League baseball, the coach would put me in the left field or the right field, depending on which way he thought the ball would not go. I was just kind of shielded. I was always batting ninth. I very seldom, hit anything. There was one glorious moment where I hit a home run, and I will never forget that feeling. But other than that, it was just, no one was going to pick me. And so they would go through picking sides, and they would work through the most athletic guys, and then eventually they'd get down to me and some girl, and, you're just hoping they don't pick the girl. That would be the ultimate in humiliation. But we know what it's like to not feel wanted, to not be chosen. God has chosen us. We are elect exiles according to the foreknowledge of the Father. It's not that God just saw, this guy feels bad, and so I'm going to choose him and make him feel better about himself. No, before the creation of the world, God had a plan. God knew that He was going to choose us, and He knew what it was going to cost Him. He chose us as children. And you understand, we appreciate adoption. We love families that have adopted little children or even babies. You understand the first century adoption was not that way. It was very rare. I don't know if it ever even existed that you would adopt a baby. I know the Christians would go into the arena and they would pick up the babies that had just been abandoned on the steps. But that's not really the idea of adoption that Peter is mentioning here. Adoption in the first century world was almost always an adult adoption. It was when a wealthy man had no legal heir to his inheritance. And so what he would do if he had no children is he would choose the most distinguished slave, the most prominent steward in his household, and he would essentially say, "You are now going to receive everything that I own. Everything that I have that I would have left to my son or my daughter is now going to go to you." That is the picture Peter is giving us here in 1 Peter chapter 1. Let's look here. The way he describes it. We are chosen, we are elect exiles according to the foreknowledge of the Father. Verse 2, in sanctification of the Spirit for obedience to Jesus Christ, for sprinkling with His blood, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. Notice what he says in verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father, emphasis on Father, of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to His great mercy, He has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. To what? An inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you. We are a living stone, he'll say in chapter 2, rejected by men, but chosen and precious in God's sight. We are a chosen race, chapter 2 and verse 9 says. A royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession. Once we were not a people, but now we are God's people. He has chosen us. He has selected us. He has made us His own sons and daughters. We are now joint heirs, Paul will say in Romans chapter 8, with Christ. We are His sons and daughters just as much as His only begotten Son is. And this leads naturally into our mission as he continues in chapter 2 and verse 10. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. Notice what he says in verse 12. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles, the world, honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Our mission statement is to proclaim the praises of Him who called us out of the world, called us out of darkness into His marvelous light. And we do that not just through the spoken word. They will see that we are different. There are tangible ways that the world can look at us and observe in their own experience that there's something different about us. And it will cause them, chapter 3, to ask for a reason for the hope that is within us. And we give our defense. We give our meek defense. We present to them the story of how God, before the foundation of time, chose us, redeemed us, bought us with His own blood, and has given us this peace that passes understanding. He has given us this hope. That is what Peter has in mind when he says, they will see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. I think he's talking about their conversion. They will become Christians. And not just because they hear us preaching the gospel. They see us living the gospel. That's what attracts them. That's what draws them in. And so, that's what the message is about this morning. I want us to see, and we're going to see this not only this morning in 1 Peter 3, we're also going to see that this afternoon in Ephesians 5. I want us to see marriage as an expression of evangelism. That in marriage, both husbands and wives are being called to walk in the steps of our Savior, to go with Jesus to the cross, as He has called us to. And to lay ourselves down, to lay ourselves on the altar in sacrificial love, in willing submission, and display to the world, not just preach to the world, but show the world what the gospel is all about. I hope and I pray that after this series is over, that our families will be stronger, and that we'll get to enjoy the blessings that God intends for us of family. But that's not the goal. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that we, as elect exiles, people who have been called out of darkness into light, will show and shine the light in this dark and sinful world, and that the gospel will be proclaimed through our transformed lives, through our transformed families and marriages. And so let's talk about how the wife, in a very unique way, there's a unique way in which the husband displays Christ. We'll look at it in Ephesians 5. But how does the wife display Christ in her life? It's through her respectful submission. And let's read again here in verse 1 of chapter 3, what Peter says to wives. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. The first thing I want you to see here in our text is that this submission is not qualified by anything. Now, we understand that we ought to obey God rather than men. If your husband is telling you to do something that is wrong, outside the will of God, you disobey your husband. But other than that, Peter is saying, and Paul says the same thing, as we'll see this afternoon, to wives, that this submission is unqualified. It's unconditional. It is complete and it is total. The emphasis in Ephesians, as we'll see, is it is all to the Lord, whether to the husband or to the wife, whether to children or to parents or to slaves or masters. Everything in that section of Ephesians dealing with all of these relationships, it's all to the Lord. The same emphasis is found here in 1 Peter. He makes the same point. Actually, this section where he says, likewise, wives in chapter 3 and verse 1, it begins back in verse 13 of chapter 2, where he says to citizens, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the governor supreme or to governors. You get the idea. Why are citizens, especially in this time, we think our government is bad today, and it is bad. I'm not defending our government. But we think that things are bad today. Go back and read your history books about Rome, especially under emperors like Nero, who was crazy, and he hated Christians. And yet Peter is saying, in this context, you be submissive. You, for the Lord's sake, be subject to these evil governments, to every human institution. He doesn't leave out any. He doesn't say just to the good ones, but also to the evil ones, to every human institution. Why? It's not because they're worthy. It's not because they're good. It's because it's for the Lord's sake. Verse 15, he says, this is the will of God. This is the will of God, that by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. In verse 17, he says, honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God. That's at the middle of all of this. Love the brotherhood, or honor the emperor. And then what does he say to servants in verse 18? Same thing he said to citizens. Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. Why? For this is a gracious thing when mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. So you get the idea. Whether to citizens, whether to servants, the message is the same. It doesn't matter whether they're good. It doesn't matter whether they're kind, beneficent, fair, elected, dictators. It doesn't matter. You submit for the Lord's sake. And then he says in chapter 3 and verse 1, likewise, wives. And just so we know that he means unconditional, he talks to wives who are married to whom? Unbelieving husbands. So we're not considering Ephesians 5. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. We're not talking about a good husband. We're not talking about a husband who is laying down his life sacrificially for his wife, and you submit to him because he's so nice to you and he's so kind to you and he meets all of your needs and he compliments you. That's not what he's considering. He's considering here someone who may not even believe in God. And understand, in the first century, a woman didn't have rights. And for a woman to choose her own God, to many men, if not most men in the first century world, would be a sign of disrespect. It would be a way of taking away honor from him. And so what Peter says is, I know this can't be easy for you, Christian woman, sister, as you're dealing with this perhaps tyrant of a man who doesn't respect God, who doesn't believe in Jesus Christ, who doesn't share the same hope and the same love that you have for the Lord. Be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word, what? By the conduct of their wives. Now, he's not saying here that you can be saved without hearing the gospel. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Peter believes that. What he's saying is that as a matter of emphasis, what's going to get his attention? Is it going to be through your nagging him, through your berating him, through your making fun of him, or showing complete disrespect? Is that going to get him? Preaching sermons to him? No, that's not. We don't need sermons right now. What we need is a submissive heart. That, more than the sermons, is going to affect him. He can be won by your conduct. When they see your respectful and pure conduct, the gospel can be seen. And we're going to come back to this in just a minute. But I want to skip ahead, and now that we've talked about the wife and her situation, and you understand she's in a difficult situation, especially if she's married to a Christian husband. But even if she's married to a believing husband, it's not an easy position to be in as a submissive wife. What does Peter say to the husbands? He says essentially the same thing that Paul says in Ephesians 5, but the emphasis is different. What he says is, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Doesn't say, husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. He says, live with them in an understanding way. What does that mean? He says, you need to show honor to the woman as to the weaker vessel. And a lot of debate has gone on about what the weaker vessel meant. Does it mean that she's physically weaker? Does it mean that she has she's emotionally weak, more fragile in that way? I would suggest that what he's talking about is she's weaker in the sense of her position. She is in a more vulnerable state. We've assumed here that these are Christian husbands in verse 7, married to, otherwise he wouldn't be addressing them. The non-Christian husband wouldn't be reading verse 7. He's speaking to Christian husbands here, married to Christian wives. And what he says to them is that you are joint heirs with Christ. The inheritance that you have, we talked about in chapter 1 and verse 3, or verse 4, that is imperishable, undefiled, reserved. She's got the same inheritance that you have. She is likewise a child of God. She's a daughter of God. And she's receiving the same inheritance that you're receiving. She is in a position of submission, yes, but she's not beneath you. She is not less than you. She is a child of God. She is a part of that same royal priesthood. She is likewise chosen and precious to God. But she's vulnerable because she has to submit to you. Have you ever wondered what it would be like, guys, husbands, if all of a sudden God just flipped the roles? What if that happened? What if a divine message came down right now that in 5 seconds, you're now going to be submissive to your wife and she's going to have the responsibilities of leading you as a spiritual leader. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom. How's it feel? Some of us would be thinking, okay, now I'm going to get it. Now it's payback, right? The way I've been treating her all this time. I've been the example of what she's now going to be to me. Now I'm going to get it. Some of us would be a little bit nervous because of that. Understand, it's not easy to submit. The example he uses in the verses right before verse 7 is Sarah and holy women who hoped in God. Could you imagine what it would be like to be Sarah? Abraham comes home one day and he says, honey, pack your bags. We're moving. Where are we going, Abraham? I have no idea. What does she do? Did she protest? Did she argue back? Did she say, honey, we have a really nice home here. This is our life. My family's here. All my friends are here. The kids, or they don't have kids yet. But you understand the situation. That's not what she did. She submitted to Abraham, calling him Lord. That is a difficult position to be in. My wife has had to do that on more than one occasion. Where not because it was her idea, not because she thought this was the best way, but simply because she has been commanded by God to submit to me, she said, yes. That's what we're going to do. And she supported me. We need to be careful, Peter says, that we don't abuse this power that we have. Because what he reminds us at the end of this verse is that if we are not careful and we don't dwell with them in an understanding way, if we don't show honor to them, which I think implies that we listen to them, yes, the decision is going to come down to us. But no, we shouldn't make these plans unilaterally without asking, so what do you think about this? We should consider their thoughts. We should consider their needs. We should consider even their feelings. I'm not saying that necessarily is going to change the decision. We don't need to abuse this power, this authority that God has given us. He says, otherwise, your prayers could be hindered. My father-in-law was a very generous man. He bought me a car on one occasion. Just called me up out of the blue and said, David, I'm going to buy you a car. I mean, that's the kind of man he was. Imagine, though, that my in-laws were visiting one weekend, and the whole weekend I was just tearing down Adrian, calling her names, disrespectful to her, shouting, just being a jerk the whole weekend. In front of them, not just behind closed doors, but in front of my mother-in-law and father-in-law, treating their daughter like garbage. Imagine what my father-in-law would think if at the end of that weekend, I went up to him and said, hey, Donnie, I could really use $5,000 right now. What do you think Donnie would say to me? What should he say to me after the way I've been treating his daughter? You understand that's what Peter is saying about God and our relationship with our wives? She, too, is a child of God. And when you treat her like that, understand that's God's daughter you're treating like that. Why should God listen to your prayers if you're treating His daughter like garbage? And so that's my word to the husbands. We're going to come back to the husbands this afternoon. But let's go back to the wives. What happens when the identity of a woman is completely wrapped up in God? Something beautiful happens. A beauty comes out of that is compelling and powerful. And I want to share with the wives the incredible power and influence that you can have over your husband. No one is going to influence your husband more than you. You have the power to change and motivate and challenge and sanctify him like nobody else. What's the greatest gift you can give to your husband? We'll go back to what we talked about in the first hour. Let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. This is the gift that you can give to your husband. This beauty. And this beauty is so powerful that Peter says in the first verse that this pure conduct, this submissive attitude that you have can even win your husband's heart that he might become a Christian. He doesn't guarantee that it will happen. And understand, the wife who has her identity wrapped up in God, she doesn't necessarily need that. She's hoping for it. She's praying for it. She wants it more than anything else in this life. But all she has is wrapped up in God. She's secure in who she is. That's actually the reason why she's able to so willingly submit to Him. But it's the power of the gospel being lived out. I want you to notice, before we get to that point, the first word in this verse is likewise. Now, the likewise is likely going back to verse 13 of chapter 2 and verse 18 of chapter 2. But the immediate context of the likewise is what? What he said about Christ. In verse 21, he says, "For to this you have been called," speaking to the slaves, "because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in His steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in His mouth. When He was reviled, He did not revile in return. When He suffered, He did not threaten, but continued entrusting Himself to Him who judges justly. He Himself bore our sins in His body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By His wounds you have been healed. For you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. Likewise." Do you hear that? I know there's a chapter division there. Peter didn't put that chapter division there. The likewise is saying to the wife, you can, through your meek and quiet spirit, have the same disposition that Jesus had on the cross. What happened? What did Jesus do when people were hurling all of those false accusations? What did He say in return when He was reviled? He did not revile in return.
When he suffered all of those indignities, they were literally spitting in his face. What did he do in return? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. By his stripes you have been healed. And he says to wives, without a word, you can win your husband by exemplifying the character of Christ. That's the gift you can give to your husband. And it not only works on unbelieving husbands, I can tell you from experience, it works on believers as well. No one, not even my mom and dad, and I have a wonderful father and mother. I had wonderful grandparents to all raise me and shape me and make me the man that I am by God's grace. But no one has impacted my life more than Adrienne. That's the power that she has, and she has exerted in my life. You can have that same kind of power, and you do have that same kind of power over your husband. Let me say just a word about physical intimacy. We talked about this last night. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights. You understand what Paul is talking about there. And likewise the wife to her husband. The husband doesn't have authority over his body. The wife doesn't have authority over her body. You need to be very careful, wives, that you not use this as a weapon for leverage to get what you want or to get even. You don't have that right. You need to be open and communicative with your husband about your feelings. I'm not saying you don't share with your husband how you feel. Just be careful. This is one of the two things marriage counselors say that most fights arise over: money and sex. Don't use this in a worldly way. Understand what this means to your husband. Proverbs 5 and verse 15, the wise man said, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. And we know what he's talking about in this context. He's comparing this relationship to a man as like water. A man can survive without sex. But you're making his life really difficult when you present a further challenge in your marriage by withholding yourself from him. And so be careful about this power that you have. But more important than physical intimacy, I want to say another word about spiritual intimacy. What's the one reason why you might abstain, why you might separate yourselves for a period of time? He says, do not deprive one another, 1 Corinthians 7 verse 5, except perhaps by agreement, both of you, for a limited time, not forever. Why? That you may devote yourselves to prayer. What's more important to a man and a woman than physical intimacy? Spiritual intimacy. The only thing, Paul says, that would trump that is spending time in prayer. Well, what do you do if your husband's not the spiritual leader that he ought to be? I'm married to a Christian. I thank God that he's not an unbeliever, that he comes with me to church, and that he, is mostly a really good spiritual leader. But he's not leading me as I feel like I need to be led. I wish he would study more with me. I wish we could have more deep spiritual conversations together. I wish that he would offer to pray with me. I really wish that I had that in my marriage. What do you do if you're in a situation where your husband is not the spiritual leader that he ought to be? Do you complain? Do you nag? Do you manipulate? No, that is not going to produce any kind of good, positive response. In fact, it may make things even worse, not better. I want you to think about Abigail. What do you think her marriage was like with Nabal? Nabal was a fool. Do you think she demonstrated the same kind of meekness and gentleness with her husband as she did with David? I'd find it very hard to believe that she didn't. I actually think that the way that she responded to David, bowing before him, calling him Lord, coming with all of those goodies that she brought, the food, the provisions, showing that wisdom and discretion in the way that she taught. I want to think that Abigail was so good at that because she had years of experience. Like she's been doing this every single day. I mean, she could give us all PR lessons on how to deal with unreasonable clients. I mean, Abigail was a master at this because this had been her marriage. What do you think her prayers sounded like? Have you ever thought about that? What are the prayers of Abigail? You've got to believe that she prayed for her husband. You've got to believe that she prayed for herself. What do you think her prayers sounded like? I don't know, but I want to suggest a few prayers. Let me give you some prayers, and this is on the back page of your handout. Here's a prayer for wives. Based on 1 Peter 2 and verse 21, Lord, help me to follow the example of Christ and be to my husband what he needs me to be. I can hear Abigail praying something like that. Not about Christ, understand, but praying something like that. Based on 1 Peter 2 and verse 22, Lord, keep me from sinning. Even though my husband will often sin against me, keep bitterness and resentfulness out of my heart. Give me courage to love him consistently and to be respectful of him and submissive to him. I can hear Abigail praying that almost every single day. Based on 1 Peter 2, 23 through 25, Father, give me faith to trust you and to trust in your promises. Give me an eternal perspective. Help me to value my husband's soul as something greater than my personal rights. Help me to love as Christ loved. Help me to forgive as he forgave. Help me to bear my husband's burdens as my Savior has borne mine. Now, I know that's a little bit out of bounds of anything Abigail would think about, but I see in Abigail her living this. I see her giving us a Christ-like example, at least in the way she interacted with David. I've got to believe she acted that way to her husband. And so I can hear her praying something like this. And then based on 1 Peter 2 and verse 12, Father, I ask that you do for my husband what I cannot. As I pray for the strength to be a Christ-like influence in his life, I ask that you might shape him and mold him into the man that you have called him to be. And I do not ask this for my own sake, but so that your name may be glorified. Can you take that prayer and pray to God? You may be surprised at how God will help you to be more like Christ in your marriage. And you may be surprised that as these little 1% changes happen over time, how your husband might surprise you. Again, it's not a guarantee. Nabal, what can you say? But did God hear Abigail's prayers? Did God answer Abigail's prayers? Absolutely. And that's all that really matters, isn't it? Think about all those servants in the household that were impacted by the godly influence of Abigail. Think about people in your life, your sphere of influence. Think about this. I talked just a minute ago about the power of a father's influence on his daughter and how important that relationship is. I want you to think for a moment about how important a mother's relationship is, not just with her daughters, but also with her sons. Hopefully our sons are going to see in us an example of Christ. We're going to talk about that this afternoon. A husband loving his wife as Christ loved the church. That's what we want our sons to do and to be. We want them to be servant leaders like that, either in their home, community, whatever. What do our sons learn from our moms? Well, what they learn is this. They get to see a mom who submits to dad, even when dad may not always deserve that submission. They see the power of a meek and quiet spirit. And I'm telling you, moms, your relationship with your daughters is important. Obviously, they need to learn in you a submissive heart. Your sons need to learn that in you as well. You have a profound influence on their lives. So can we this weekend, get 1% better? Meg and Peter have been married for more than 20 years. On Valentine's Day, Meg went all out, giving Peter his favorite candy, tickets to an upcoming hockey game, and later that night she wrapped herself in a special outfit purchased just for the occasion. Peter got her a card at the grocery store he purchased on his way home from work. He didn't add anything to it either. He just signed it, Peter. He even forgot to write the word love. A couple of days later, Meg tried to explain that she felt a little taken for granted. Apparently, Peter misunderstood her intent because when 2 months later they celebrated their 22nd anniversary, Peter didn't get Meg anything. Meg waited throughout the day, wondering when Peter would bring out the present, but the present never came. Since she had given Peter her present, some rather expensive fishing lures, she knew Peter had to know it was their anniversary. So as they got ready for bed, Meg waited in anticipation, but Peter slipped in beside her and promptly went to sleep. The next morning, Meg was beside herself. She fretted all day until Peter came home from work. And then she asked, "How could you not give me anything for our anniversary, especially after our conversation about Valentine's Day?" "Well, I thought about getting you something, but it didn't work out," he replied. "And I knew not to get you a card because you didn't like it the last time." It's not that I didn't like the card. It's just that the card alone seemed a little sparse. But even that's better than nothing. Several months later, Meg had a birthday. This time, Peter got her a present, a kitchen tool set. Several weeks before, Meg had asked to borrow Peter's tape measure and screwdriver. Peter figured Meg should have her own small set of kitchen tools so she didn't have to borrow his. Meg recounted all this, then explained how she had tried to get her husband to read several how-to books on loving your spouse, but it just didn't interest him. He'd read the first few pages, lose interest, and never pick up the book again. "I've realized it's never going to change," she confessed, "but I love him anyway. I love him anyway." You know, there's a lot of reasons why we would love somebody. They're nice to me, they're kind, they're considerate, they compliment me, all those things. It's easy to love because. Can we love someone anyway? That's what Jesus did for us. Again, we know what he did for us on the cross, and it wasn't because there was anything desirable in us. Nothing beautiful. We were sinners, rebellious. We were spitting in his face. And yet he said, "Father, forgive them, for they..." He loved us anyway. Can we do that same thing for our husbands? Can we do that same thing for our wives? That's what we're being called to love with the love of Christ. Understand, this is what Christ has done for you. If you're not a child of God and you've been touched by the cross, you realize that Jesus rose, that he's seated at God's right hand, that he's Lord, why not confess him this morning? This could be your way, as it were, of accepting the invitation to marriage. God has shown how valuable you are to him. Why not say, "I'm going to accept this gift. I'm going to confess Jesus as Lord. I'm going to take his name, just like a wife would take the name of her husband. And I'm going to submit to him all my days." And when you come up out of the watery grave of baptism, you will be baptized, as Paul says, into Christ. You will be his bride. Why not accept this invitation as we stand and sing?
Oh, the